Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Iran continues to face intense international scrutiny amid crackdowns on dissent, arrests of activists and ongoing repression of freedom of expression. From the legacy of the women, life, freedom, protests to regime's regional alliances with powers like Russia and China, and from nuclear tensions to economic strain under sanctions, Iran stands at a critical crossroads. To discuss these issues and more, joining us now is Kereshme Gharibnejad, an Iranian artist, activist and educator. She's based in Berlin and she has been a strong voice against state repression in Iran and an advocate for human rights, cultural resistance and democratic freedoms in the country. Thank you very much for joining us, Kereshme. It's a pleasure to have you here on the programme.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. As an Iranian activist living in Berlin, what is your perspective on the current Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's leadership and its influence on Iran's domestic policies, particularly in suppressing dissent and freedom of expression?
What we have to understand here is that Khamenei stands above Iran's law and policies, heavily influencing both domestic and foreign policy by suppressing dissent and freedom of expression. He labels protesters as Western agents or heretics and uses his influence over the IRGC, which is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to enforce that stance. And the IRGC is a powerful military and security force that answers directly to the Supreme Leader. They're the backbone of enforcing the regime's will.
And of course, this isn't over. Iran continues to face an internet blackout. Information is trickling out of the country. We've had a reported 5,000 people have been killed now by Iranian officials. However, over in the Western world, Reza Pahlavi, he's positioned himself as a voice for democratic change in Iran. Do you see his advocacy as a viable path forward for the country, or does it risk alienating certain factions within the opposition?
I think we have reached a point which there is no risking. We have the risks behind us. Reza Pahlavi is being called on by many Iranian protesters as a kind of figure of transition. He's positioning himself not as a permanent ruler, but someone who can help move towards democracy and genuinely free elections. And he sees himself as a transitional bridge rather than a destination. He has both supporters from inside and outside of Iran. And I think we have to respect the fact that he's being called on from Iran, from inside of Iran, from the protesters on the soil. And even though some people might not want him as a face of a movement, he's still the figure many protesters are calling, and he's a central point of reference for that transition.
And of course, as well as this ongoing unrest that's currently occurring, how do you assess the impact of the 2022 Women, Life, Freedom protests in Iran, and what role do you believe international solidarity plays in sustaining the movement against the regime?
The Jina Mahsa Amini's death ignited a nationwide movement that just crystallized the decades of frustration and oppression into one vivid slogan. Jin Jianazadi, which is actually a Kurdish slogan, has been translated into the Persian version of it, Zan Zendegi Azadi, meaning woman, life, freedom. And this wasn't just against the dress code, against the hijab in Iran, it was against the architecture of repression itself. And the uprising in 2022 didn't end the Islamic Republic, no surprises there. The regime stands still, suppresses dissent, continues to imprison, torture, and kill the protesters. And unfortunately, a grim reminder that Afghanistan is not alone in silencing women's voices and tripping on women's bodies with gender apartheid, systematic discrimination, brutality, and theocratic overreach all in one breath.
And Afran Soltani has been vocal about cultural resistance, but he was arrested. What do you feel about the crackdown on protesters in Iran?
Afran Soltani is alive, as confirmed by Watchdog. The crackdown on protesters in Iran is barbaric as far as barbarians can go. They're shooting people in their heads on the streets. Not only that, but when they're admitted to hospitals to be treated, they crack down on them even in the hospitals. We have seen corpses with syringes in their arms, with hospital robes around them, meaning they have been killed while they were being treated in hospitals.
Of course, and moving out of that situation, how are you viewing Turkey's stance, along with other nations supporting Iran, like Russia, China, in enabling the regime's regional influence here?
Turkey, Russia, and China, the acts of resistance with Iran in that region are not supporting Iran from loyalty, but from self-interest and leverage. Turkey publicly opposes foreign intervention in Iran and pushes for dialogue to avoid regional chaos while balancing NATO and regional ambitions for itself. And it is a fact that Iran has sold billions of dollars worth of missiles and other military equipment to Russia before the Ukraine invasion began, and also while the war has been happening, sending them ballistic missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and ammunition. And China buys Iranian oil. It rejects force, but its support is limited to trade and rhetorical opposition to war, not a security shield. None of these states are ideologically committed to Iran's domestic oppression. For them, Tehran and Iran are useful.
And Iran's nuclear program continues to be a flashpoint in global diplomacy. Obviously, considering the war with Israel last year in the summer. From your vantage point, what are the implications for ordinary Iranians, and how should the international community respond to prevent escalation when it comes to this?
For ordinary people, for ordinary Iranians, the nuclear standoff means inflation at breakfast, sanctions at lunch, and anxiety at night. The regime frames enrichment as dignity, but people experience it as isolation from the Western world, from diplomacy. But we have to emphasize that it has weakened the regime and it should go on.
And of course, Iran's economy is strained by sanctions and internal mismanagement. That's why these protests started in the first place, the rial falling and the economic hardship of the Iranian people. Opposition from countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia as well. Do you see the United States stepping in to act against Khamenei's regime and playing a role in supporting Iranian civil society without exacerbating tensions in the region?
Thank you for that question. I should start answering by saying people should stop making the movement from Iran, inside of Iran, looking like American or Israel owned, because that is exactly the rhetoric that the regime has been using. The regime's favorite excuse is calling the protesters foreign puppets for America and for Israel. And President Trump has said that he's been watching the development of the protests in Iran, that he will stand behind the people, behind the protests. And people, the Iranian people, have hope, and they're still waiting for his help.
And in terms of foreign intervention, we of course have seen Donald Trump speak out in support of the protesters, urging Iranians to take over their institutions. He said help was coming. A lot of people on the left side, of course, have said leave the Iranian people to decide their own fate. In reality, do you think, would you say that Iran would help and the Iranian people would welcome that help from the United States? And what kind of intervention you think would be the most acceptable and you think would cause less disruption in the region and of course obstruct a wider regional conflict, which of course is a possibility?
The voice of protesters from Iran coming out are very clear on that stance. They're calling for military intervention of the US, of President Trump taking action against the regime. The fate of Iranian people have been decided already. They don't want this regime and they want to put an end to it. But we have to see and we have to understand that people cannot protest against machine guns, against militias that has been important to Iran. 5,000 Iraqi militias and also Taliban terrorists are shooting at Iranian people, and they're asking for military intervention.
And as you said, would you think that that intervention would be welcomed? Of course, the Iranian regime, Khamenei, Abbas Araghchi has said that if the United States did intervene, then the Revolutionary Guard would retaliate and strike Israel, as well as United States bases in the region. Do you think that, given these consequences, it would be a good thing for the Americans to intervene in Iran?
The Islamic Republic has been already attacking Israel for many decades. The last atrocity that they did within their arms, called Hamas in Israel, was on October 7th in Kibbutzim, Israel. That was Iran, and that was in the year where we had the uprisings, the movement Woman, Life, Freedom, and it was turning eyes to Israel, to the Gaza-Israel war only as a distraction. And so a military intervention from the US and the Islamic Republic threatening America is only a bluff. They don't have to hear anything that the regime has to say. The times of having a dialogue with the regime, we have to put an end to it.
What have you thought of the international response in general to the protests? Of course, we've seen 5,000 people now killed so far. Devastating numbers and even stories that are coming out that are now trickling out of the country of 92 million people, of course. Have you been satisfied with the international reaction here? Of course, we've seen sanctions imposed by European powers, as well as tariffs by proposed tariffs by President Donald Trump. What have you thought of the international response when it came to 4,500 protesters being killed in the space of just over 2 weeks?
There are different numbers coming out of Iran. Some people are talking about 12,000 deaths. Others have been talking about 32,000 deaths. And even the official Iranian TV has been talking about 42,000 people. So the situation in Iran is escalating, and the West has been silent about this issue. And they have to stop the appeasing policy, the appeasing politics against the regime. They have to take a stance, and anything else that the European countries say, or US, it will be seen as weakness in Tehran.
Kereshme Gharibnejad, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for taking the time here on Focal Length. But with that, it's a wrap on this episode. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.